The great chamber on board the vessel Eternal Wisdom hummed with quiet tension. 12 different alien species sat around a massive circular table that floated in the center of the room. Each representative looked nothing like the others. Had scales that changed colors with their emotions. Others had multiple arms or eyes that glowed in the dark. A few looked like living crystals that sang instead of speaking. Ambassador Velthar of the Kryn people stood at the head of the table. His silicon-based body reflected the soft blue light of the chamber. He had called this emergency meeting of the Galactic Council for one reason. They were all going to die. The enemy has destroyed another world, Velthar announced. Its voice sounded like wind moving through metal tubes. The Helix civilization is gone. 17 advanced species wiped out in the past solar cycle. A heavy silence filled the room. The council members had watched 17 different worlds disappear. Each time the enemy came without warning. This time, nothing remained but empty space where entire planets used to orbit their stars. Weapons do nothing, said Council Member Zeph from the Aquatic Union. Her voice bubbled through the water tank that kept her alive. Our shields break like glass. Our fastest ships cannot escape them. We have tried everything, added Representative Call, whose rocky body scraped against his chair as he moved. Every weapon we built in 1,000 years of war. Every defense system our greatest minds could design. Nothing works. Velthar nodded slowly. The Council had ruled the galaxy for millions of years. They had technology that could move stars and create new forms of life. They could travel faster than light and communicate across the galaxy in seconds. But none of it mattered now. There is one option we have not tried, Velthar said. The Primitive Species Protocol. Several Council members made sounds of disgust. Others looked confused. The Primitive Species Protocol was something they had created long ago but never used. It was considered desperate and foolish. You want to study the primitive worlds? Councilmember Yeth, her crystalline body ringing like a bell. Quite. Could they possibly teach us? Perhaps nothing, Velthar admitted. But our advanced thinking has failed. Maybe we need minds that work differently. Minds that are not limited by our logic and rules. The debate went on for hours. Some council members thought the idea was stupid. Others worried it was dangerous to contact primitive species. Few believed it might be their only hope. Finally, they voted. By the smallest possible margin, the Primitive Species Protocol was approved. 3 days later, Velthar stood in the observation deck of the research ship. Below him, a small blue and green planet turned slowly in space. The locals called it Earth to the Council. It was subject planet 7834. The species is very young, reported Dr. Nix, the chief researcher. Her insect-like body clicked as she moved between different screens, showing data about Earth. They have only had basic technology for a few hundred of their years. They still use chemical rockets to barely reach their own moon. Lord, about their behavior, Velthar asked. Chaotic, violent, unpredictable, Dr. Nix replied. They fight wars over resources they have plenty of. They create art about imaginary things. They risk their lives to save complete strangers. Their logic makes no sense to us. Perfect, Velthar said. Show me the candidates. The first screen showed a man in military clothing helping children in a war zone. Kim Day, Dr. Nix, explained. Former soldier, now works with refugee relief. He has won battles that should have been impossible to win. His strategies make no sense according to military science, but they work. The second screen showed a woman taking apart a broken television in a small shop. Park Hannah, Dr. Nix, continued. Genius-level intelligence in their quantum physics left their most advanced universities to fix simple machines for poor people. Her research papers suggest ideas our own scientists consider impossible. The third screen showed a young man building something strange out of old car parts and electronic waste. Lee Tae, Dr. Nix, finished. No formal education in engineering, but builds machines that work better than they should. Uses principles our computers cannot understand. Velder studied each human carefully. They looked so simple compared to council species. Just 2 arms, 2 legs, 1 head, soft skin with no natural armor. No special abilities that the council could detect. And yet something about them felt different. Begin the collection, he ordered. Kim Dae was loading medical supplies into a truck when the world went white around him. He had been working in a refugee camp on the border between 2 countries that had been fighting for years. One moment, he was counting boxes of medicine. The next moment, he was lying on a smooth metal floor in a room filled with soft light. He sat up slowly, his soldier training keeping him calm even as his mind raced. The room had no corners. The walls curved into the ceiling in a way that hurt his eyes to look at. There were no windows or doors that he could see. "Where am I?" he called out, but his voice seemed to disappear into the walls. Park Hannah had been closing her family's electronics shop when everything changed. She was fixing an old radio that belonged to her neighbor, an elderly woman who could not afford a new one. Hannah enjoyed the simple work of repairing things, even though her friends thought she was wasting her genius on such basic tasks. The white light took her while she was soldering a connection. When it faded, she found herself in the same strange room as Kim Dae, though she did not know about him yet. She touched the walls and felt them hum with energy she could not identify. The material was nothing like any metal or plastic she knew. It felt alive somehow, warm and responsive to her touch. Lee Tae had been in his workshop when the light came for him. He was building a new water purifier for his neighborhood using parts from old washing machines and car batteries. The design came to him in dreams, and he never questioned why his strange inventions always worked when he woke up on the metal floor. His first thought was not fear, but curiosity. He had never seen a room like this, but already his mind was working out how it might be built. The 3 humans spent what felt like hours alone in their separate rooms. They tried calling out, tried finding ways to escape, tried to understand what had happened to them. Nothing worked. Then, without warning, the walls became transparent. They could see each other now, in identical rooms arranged in a triangle. Kim Dae waved at the others. Park Hannah tried to communicate through gestures. Kay pressed his hands against the wall, trying to find a way through dot above them. A new light appeared. It was not the harsh white light that had brought them here. This light moved and shifted, forming shapes and patterns that almost looked like a face. "Do not be afraid," the light said in perfect Korean. "We need your help." The 3 humans looked at each other through the transparent walls. They had been taken from their world by something beyond their understanding. They were alone, far from home, facing the unknown. But as Kim Dae met the eyes of his fellow prisoners, as Park Hannah saw the determination in their faces, as Lee Tae felt the strange excitement of a new challenge, they realized something important. They were not really alone. And maybe, just maybe, being human was exactly what this situation needed. The light above them slowly took shape. What had been moving patterns of brightness became something that looked almost like a face, but not quite human. The features were too sharp, too geometric. When it spoke, the voice came from everywhere. At once, "I am Ambassador Velthor of the Galactic Council," the being said. "You have been brought here because your species may hold the key to saving all life in the galaxy." Kim Dae stepped forward in his transparent room. His military training had taught him to stay calm in impossible situations. "What do you mean? What's happening to us?" The walls around them suddenly changed. Instead of seeing each other, the 3 humans found themselves looking out into space. Stars filled their vision, but something was wrong. In the distance, they could see what looked like a solar system, but it was dying. Planets were breaking apart, turning into dust and debris. This is what we face, Veltar explained. An enemy that destroys entire worlds. We have lost 17 civilizations in what you would call 1 year. Our technology cannot stop them. Our weapons are useless. Park Hannah pressed her face against the transparent wall, staring at the destruction. Her scientific mind was racing. How is that possible? What kind of force could tear apart planets like that? We do not know, Velthor admitted. That is why you are here. The Galactic Council has ruled space for millions of your years. We are the most advanced beings in the galaxy. Or perhaps being advanced is our weakness. Perhaps we need minds that think differently. Li Tay laughed, but it was not a happy sound. You think we can help? Look at us. We can barely travel to our own moon. Our most powerful weapons are like toys compared to what you must have. Yes, Veltar said. It's exactly why we chose you. The space view disappeared, and the walls became solid again. A section of Kim Dae's room opened, and he found himself able to walk into a larger chamber. Park, Hannah, and Li Tay joined him through similar openings. The room they entered was vast. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into shadows. Strange. Devices lined the walls, humming with energy. In the center stood Ambassador Velthor. He was taller than the humans, made of what looked like living metal that reflected light in rainbow patterns. His face was angular, with eyes that glowed soft blue. When he moved, his body made musical sounds like wind chimes. Welcome aboard the Eternal Wisdom, he said. This ship has been your people's guardian for the past 3 months. We have watched you, studied you, learned about your species. 3 months. Park Hannah said. But we were just taken. It feels like only a few hours. Time moves differently here, Veltor explained. We have suspended your biological functions while we prepared for this moment. Do not worry. No harm has come to you. Kim Dae looked around the chamber. Everything was clean and perfect, too perfect. It reminded him of hospitals, places where people went to be fixed. What do you want us to do? We will test your abilities, Veltar said. We will study how you think, how you solve problems. If you prove useful, you will help us save the galaxy. If not, ... double quotes, he paused. We will return you to your world with no memory of this experience. The first test began immediately. Veltar led them to a room filled with holographic displays. The displays showed a space battle between 2 fleets of ships. One fleet was clearly losing. This is a simulation of a real battle that occurred last week, Veltar explained. The defenders had superior numbers and technology, but they were defeated. How would you change the outcome? The 3 humans studied the display. Park Hannah immediately began analyzing the energy patterns of the weapons. Li Tay looked at the ship designs, trying to understand how they worked. Kim Dae watched the movement of the fleets. The losing side is fighting like they want to win, Kim Dae said after several minutes. Of course, they want to win, Veltor replied. They are defending their home world. No, they're fighting like victory is the most important thing, Kim Dae explained. But sometimes the most important thing is making sure your people survive. The defenders should have focused on evacuation, not destruction. Velthar's eyes dimmed. This was not the answer he expected. But they could have won with the right strategy, could they? Park Hannah asked. Look at these energy readings. The attacking fleet has weapons that ignore shields completely. The defenders never had a real chance. Kim Dae is right. They should have saved who they could instead of trying to save everyone. Li Tay nodded. Their ships are built for fighting other ships like themselves, but this enemy is different. It's like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the gunfight is actually a flood and you need a boat. Velthar made a sound like grinding metal. The humans were not thinking like warriors or scientists. They were thinking like something else entirely. The second test was different. The humans were shown a complex mathematical equation that described faster-than-light travel. It was graduate-level physics that should have been impossible for them to understand. Parkana looked at it for a long time. Finally, she said, "This equation assumes that space is empty." But space isn't empty. It's full of dark matter, quantum fluctuations, all kinds of things we don't understand yet. The equation accounts for known variables, Felder said. What about unknown variables? Parkana asked. What if the reason your technology isn't working against this enemy is because you're missing something basic? Something so simple that your advanced minds don't even consider it. Veltar felt something he had not experienced in centuries. Doubt. The human was suggesting that the Council's fundamental understanding of physics might be incomplete. The third test involved a broken machine. It was a simple device by Council standards, designed to convert energy from one form to another. But it had stopped working, and Council engineers could not fix it. Lite examined the machine for an hour, took it apart, looked at each piece, then put it back together. When he was done, the machine worked perfectly. How did you repair it? Veltar asked. I didn't repair it, Lite said. I just stopped it from trying to be perfect. See, this component here was designed to work with 99.9% efficiency, but it was trying so hard to reach 100% that it was burning itself out. I gave it permission to be imperfect. Velthor stared at the machine. It was working better than it ever had before. A Council engineer had designed it to be as efficient as possible. But the human had made it more efficient by making it less perfect. That night, the humans were given rooms to rest in. There were comfortable rooms with soft beds and good food, but they were still prisoners, and they all knew it. What do you think they really want? Parkana asked. They had discovered they could talk to each other through the walls. I think they're desperate, Kimday replied. Desperate people do things they normally wouldn't do, like asking for help from primitives like us. Maybe we're not as primitive as they think, Lite said. Maybe being primitive is actually an advantage somehow. In his private chamber, Viltar reviewed the test results with Dr. Nix. The humans had failed every test by Council standards. They had not shown superior intelligence, advanced technology, or powerful abilities, but they had done something else. They had thought in ways that surprised him. They had questioned assumptions that the Council never questioned. They had found solutions that worked, even when those solutions seemed wrong. Should we return them to Earth? Dr. Nix asked. Veltar considered this. The logical choice was to send them home and try a different approach, but something about the humans intrigued him. They were not what the Council expected, but perhaps that was exactly what made them valuable. No, he decided. Continue the experiment. I want to see what these humans do when faced with a real challenge. Far away in the empty space where the Helix civilization used to exist, something moved in the darkness. The enemy was coming closer to Council space, and time was running out. But aboard the Eternal Wisdom, 3 humans slept peacefully, unaware that the fate of the galaxy might depend on their very human way of thinking. The alarm sound was unlike anything the humans had ever heard. It was not loud, but it seemed to vibrate through their bones and make their teeth ache. Kimday woke first, his military training kicking in before he was fully conscious. Arcana and Lite were pulled from sleep by the strange noise that filled their rooms. Ambassador Veltar appeared in their doorways, but he looked different now. His metal skin was darker, and his blue eyes flickered like broken lights. Come quickly, he said. You need to see this. They followed him through corridors that pulsed with emergency lighting. Other aliens rushed past them, species the humans had never seen before. Some looked like walking trees, others like floating jellyfish made of light. All of them seemed afraid. The observation deck was crowded with council members when they arrived. Through the massive, transparent wall, the humans could see space filled with ships. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of different species, all fleeing in the same direction. The enemy has struck again, Valdar announced. The crystalline worlds are under attack. We are watching it happen right now. The view shifted, and the humans saw something that made their minds struggle to understand what they were seeing. In the distance, a solar system was dying. Not slowly, like a star burning out over millions of years, but quickly and violently. 3 planets orbited a yellow star, similar to Earth's sun, as they watched. The first planet simply stopped existing. One moment, it was there, spinning peacefully in space. The next moment, there was nothing but empty darkness. How is that possible? Hannah whispered. The second planet lasted a few minutes longer. They could see cities on its surface, lights that showed millions of people living there, lives. Then something invisible touched the planet, and it began to crumble like a cookie in someone's hand. Kim Day had seen many terrible things in war, but nothing like this. How many people lived on those worlds? Billions, Velta replied. His voice sounded hollow, like an echo in an empty room. The crystalline species had been part of our council for 50,000 years. They were artists and philosophers. They created beauty that could make other species weep with joy. The third planet was fighting back. The humans could see flashes of light around it as weapons fired. Ships swarmed around the world like angry bees, trying to protect their home. It was useless. Whatever was destroying the planets could not be stopped by conventional weapons. What's attacking them? Lite asked. I can't see any enemy ships. Neither can we, admitted Dr. Nix, who had joined them on the observation deck. The sensors detect nothing. No ships, no energy signatures, no matter of any kind. Yet the planets are being destroyed by something. The last planet died as they watched. The lights of its cities went out one by one, and then the world itself faded away, like smoke in the wind. All that remained was an empty star with nothing orbiting it. The observation deck fell silent. Even the aliens who had seen this happen before seemed stunned by witnessing another civilization vanish completely. How do you fight something you cannot see? Asked Council Member Zeph, her voice bubbling with fear. We followed the traditional response, replied Representative Kyle. We evacuate threatened worlds, position our fleets defensively, and deploy our most advanced weapons systems. Kim Day listened to the council members discuss their plans. Everything they suggested sounded like military procedures he had learned in officer training, textbook responses to threats. But something felt wrong about applying textbook solutions to an enemy that broke all the rules. Has anyone tried talking to them? He asked. The entire observation deck went quiet. Every alien, I turned to look at the human who had just spoken. Talking to them, Velthor repeated, as if the words made no sense in his language. Yes, talking, communication, finding out what they want, Kim Day explained. In my experience, most conflicts happen because people misunderstand each other. Maybe these attackers have a reason for what they're doing. Council member Yeth made a sound like breaking glass. They're destroying entire civilizations. What possible reason could justify that? Don't know, Kim Day admitted. But we won't find out by shooting at them, especially since shooting at them doesn't seem to work anyway. Hannah stepped forward. Kim Day has a point. In science, when you encounter something you don't understand, the first step is observation and analysis. You don't start with assumptions about what it is or what it wants. This is not a science experiment, Representative Call said, his rocky voice grinding with frustration. This is war, is it? Lite asked. Because in every war I've heard of, both sides fight. But these attackers haven't tried to fight your fleets at all. They just destroy planets and leave. That's not war behavior. That's something else. Alether found himself listening to the humans with growing interest. Their approach was completely different from anything the Council had considered. For millions of years, the Council had solved problems through superior technology and careful planning. The idea of simply asking an enemy what they wanted was so alien that it had never occurred to them. Even if we wanted to communicate with them, Dr. Nix said, how would we do it? Our most advanced communication systems cannot even detect them. Maybe that's the problem, Park Hanna suggested. Maybe your communication systems are too advanced. If these attackers can avoid your sensors and weapons, they might also be avoiding your attempts to contact them. What do you mean? Felter asked. Think about it, Park Hanna continued. Everything the Council builds is incredibly sophisticated. Your technology is so advanced that it might look like a threat to anyone who doesn't understand it. Maybe we need to try something simpler, eh? Tay nodded excitedly. Like when I fix old radios. Sometimes the problem isn't that the technology is broken. Sometimes the problem is that the technology is too complicated for what you're trying to do. The three humans looked at each other, and Kim Dae could see that they were all thinking the same thing. They had an idea, but it was so simple that the Council would probably think it was stupid. We want to try something, Kim Dae said, but you're not going to like it. What do you propose? Veltar asked. We want to build a basic radio transmitter. Park Hanna explained. Something primitive by your standards. The kind of technology Earth was using 50 years ago. A primitive radio. Dr. Nix sounded shocked. That would be like using stone tools to build a starship. Exactly, Li Tay said. Maybe that's what we need. Technology so simple that it doesn't register as a threat. The Council members began arguing among themselves. Some thought the human idea was insane. Others worried that it was too dangerous to try. A few wondered if desperation was making them consider options that should never be considered. But Velter was thinking about the test results from the previous day. The humans had solved problems by thinking in ways that surprised him. Had succeeded by being imperfect, by questioning assumptions, by choosing survival over victory. How long would it take to build this primitive radio? He asked. A few hours, Li Tay replied. I'd need some basic components, but nothing fancy. Copper, wire, simple circuits, that kind of thing. Okay? And you believe this will allow us to communicate with an enemy that our most advanced systems cannot detect? We don't know, Kim Dae admitted. But we know your advanced systems don't work. So maybe it's time to try something that might work precisely because it's not advanced. Veltar looked around the observation deck. The Council members were still arguing. In the distance, ships continued to flee from the empty space where the crystalline worlds used to exist. Soon, the enemy would move on to attack another system, and more billions would die. Do it, he decided. Build your primitive radio. We will give you whatever components you need. Dr. Nix made a sound of protest. Ambassador, this is highly irregular. We should follow established protocols. Our established protocols have failed 17 times, Velder replied. Perhaps it is time to try something irregular. As the humans began planning their simple radio transmitter, none of them noticed the small display screen in the corner of the observation deck. It showed long-range sensor data from the edge of Council space. Something was moving in the darkness, between the stars. Something invisible and patient, heading toward the next target on its list. The enemy was coming closer, and time was running out. But for the first time since the attacks began, someone was planning to do something different. Someone was going to try talking instead of fighting. It was a crazy idea. It was primitive and illogical, and had almost no chance of working. It was, in other words, a very human solution to an impossible problem. Li Te sat on the floor of the workshop, surrounded by pieces of metal and wire that looked like junk compared to the Council's advanced technology. His hands moved quickly, twisting copper wires together and connecting simple circuits. Park, Hannah, worked beside him, calculating frequencies and power levels on a piece of paper instead of using the holographic computers that filled the room. "This feels like building a paper airplane to fly to the moon," she said, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Maybe that's exactly what we need to do," Kim Dae replied. He was standing guard at the workshop door, watching the corridor outside. Many council members had made it clear they thought the human plan was dangerous and stupid. Velthor entered the workshop, his metal body reflecting the harsh work lights. "How much longer do you need?" "It's almost finished," Li Te said, without looking up. "Just need to connect the antenna array." He held up a collection of metal rods that looked like they belonged in a museum. "Next. This design is based on radio technology from Earth's 1950s. Simple frequency modulation, basic amplitude control, nothing fancy. And you believe this primitive device will succeed where our quantum communication systems have failed?" Park Hannah looked up from her calculations. "Quantum systems are designed to communicate with other advanced civilizations. They send complex data packets through subspace channels using mathematics that requires huge amounts of processing power to decode." "Yes, that is how civilized species communicate," Velthar said. "But what if the enemy doesn't recognize that as communication?" Kim Dae suggested. "What if to them your advanced signals look like weapon systems or scanning devices?" Li Te made a final connection, and the radio came to life with a soft humming sound. It was ugly compared to council technology, but it worked. "In my neighborhood, we have a saying. Sometimes the best way to talk to someone is to speak their language." "We don't know their language," Velthor pointed out. "No, but we know they're not responding to your language," Park Hannah said. "So let's try the most basic form of communication there is. Simple radio waves, the kind that any species would recognize as artificial but not threatening." The radio was moved to the ship's main communication center. Council technicians looked at it with disgust and confusion. Their equipment could send messages across the galaxy instantly, but they were being asked to use a device that could barely reach the next star system. "Where do we send the signal?" Dr. Nix asked. Kim Dae studied the star charts showing recent attack locations. They hit the crystalline worlds 12 hours ago. Based on the pattern of previous attacks, they should be moving toward the spiral arm colonies next. "We send it there," Park Hannah decided. "Broad spectrum, simple repeating pattern, not words, just mathematical sequences that show intelligence." Li Te began adjusting the radio's frequency. The simple device filled the advanced communication center with static and electronic squeaks. "Broadcasting now." Its basic counting sequence, prime numbers, then the Fibonacci sequence. For 6 hours, the radio sent its primitive signal into space. The council watched their sensors, but nothing responded. Some members began to leave, convinced the human experiment was a failure. Then, at exactly 6 hours and 17 minutes, something answered. The response came on the same frequency as their transmission. Simple mathematical patterns, but different from what they had sent. The reply was clearly artificial, clearly intelligent, but also clearly not from any known species. "Something's out there," Park Hannah whispered, staring at the radio display. "Something that understands basic mathematics, but ignored all your advanced communication attempts." "Expand the signal," Kim Dae ordered. "Send more complex patterns. Let them know we're trying to communicate, not attack." The conversation that followed was unlike anything in the galaxy's history. Two completely different forms of intelligence, trying to understand each other using the most basic form of communication possible. Numbers, patterns, simple concepts that could be understood by any thinking being. Slowly, painfully, communication began to develop. The entities on the other end of the radio link began to respond to more complex ideas. They sent back images, mathematical descriptions of physical concepts, even simple questions. They're asking about us. Park Hannah realized. They want to know what we are, where we come from. Answer them, Veltar said. Tell them we are the Galactic Council. Kim Day shook his head. No, that's not what they're asking. Stare. Not asking about the council. They're asking about the radio signal itself. They want to know about this primitive technology. The exchange continued for hours. The humans worked to translate concepts between the simple radio signals and the complex ideas they were trying to communicate. Gradually, a picture began to emerge. The entities called themselves the Cleaners. They had been created long ago by an ancient civilization to perform a specific task. Their job was to remove what they called corruption from the galaxy. Kind of corruption? Park Hannah asked through the radio, using mathematical concepts to form the question. The answer came back slowly, in patterns that took hours to decode. The Cleaners were programmed to eliminate any technology that reached a certain level of advancement. They were designed to prevent any species from developing the kind of power that could threaten the stability of the universe itself. They're destroying advanced civilizations to protect the galaxy, Veltar asked in shock. Not destroying, Kim Day corrected, reading the latest transmission. Cleaning. They don't see it as murder. They see it as maintenance. The terrible truth began to emerge through the primitive radio signals. The Cleaners had been created millions of years ago by a species that had reached the ultimate level of technological advancement. This ancient race had developed the power to manipulate reality itself, to create and destroy matter at will, to travel through time and space as easily as walking across a room. But with this power came responsibility. The ancient species realized that if too many civilizations reached their level of advancement, the universe itself could be torn apart by competing realities and conflicting uses of ultimate power. So they created the Cleaners as a safeguard, automated systems that would monitor the galaxy and eliminate any civilization that came too close to the dangerous level of advancement. The species that created us came the radio message, gave us one final command before they departed for another dimension. We were to clean the galaxy of corruption until the time of great change arrives. What time of great change? Park Hannah asked. The answer was shocking. When the species learns to communicate with us without triggering our defensive protocols. When primitive wisdom proves stronger than advanced corruption. The workshop fell silent. The three humans looked at each other with growing understanding. They've been waiting, Lee Tay said slowly. Okay. All this time, they've been waiting for someone to figure out how to talk to them. But why haven't they tried to communicate before? Veltar asked. The answer came through the radio in simple, clear patterns. The Cleaners had been programmed to respond only to non-threatening communication. Every attempt by advanced civilizations to contact them had used technology so sophisticated that it triggered their automatic defense systems. Your quantum communication networks, your subspace transmitters, your neural link systems, Kim Day explained. To them, all of that looks like weapons technology, so they destroyed the source before it can become a threat. Park Hannah added. But our simple radio doesn't look threatening, Lee Tay continued. It's so primitive that their programming recognizes it as genuine communication instead of a potential weapon. Through the radio, the Cleaners began to transmit something new. Technical data, but not about weapons or defenses. Instructions for shutting down their own systems. They want to stop, Park Hannah realized. They've been waiting millions of years for someone to pass their test. Someone who could prove that intelligence doesn't have to mean corruption. The ancient species that created us, the radio transmitted, believed that true wisdom comes from knowing when not to use the power you possess. They hoped that someday A species would prove this by choosing simplicity over complexity, communication over conquest. Velder stared at the primitive radio device. You mean the solution to stopping the cleaners was to build worse technology? Not worse, just different, Kimde said. Sometimes the most advanced answer is the simplest one. So the cleaners transmitted one final message. The test is complete. We have found the species that thinks like our creators. We await your instructions for the deactivation sequence. As the implications of this discovery sank in, alarms began sounding throughout the ship. The cleaners had been approaching the spiral arm colonies for their next cleansing operation, but now, for the first time in millions of years, there was hope that the cleansing could be stopped. The spiral arm colonies had 12 hours before the cleaners arrived. It's 12 hours to figure out how to shut down systems that had been operating automatically for millions of years. The communication center of the Eternal Wisdom buzzed with desperate activity as council members tried to understand the technical data the cleaners had transmitted. The shutdown sequence is impossibly complex, Dr. Nix announced after studying the alien instructions for hours. It requires simultaneous input from multiple sources, using technologies we don't even recognize. Velthar looked at the data streams flowing across his displays. Mathematical formulas that hurt to look at, energy patterns that defied counsel, physics, and requirements that seemed to contradict each other completely. How is this possible? He asked. The ancient species that created the cleaners was advanced beyond our understanding. But even they must have followed logical principles. Kimde leaned over Park Hannah's shoulder as she worked through the technical requirements. What if that's the problem? He suggested. What if this isn't meant to be solved by logic alone? What do you mean? Velthar asked. Look at this, Park Hannah said, pointing to a section of the instructions. Okay, the shutdown requires precise mathematical calculations, but it also requires something called emotional resonance. How do you measure emotions with mathematics? Li Te was examining another part of the data. And this section says the input must be both individual and collective at the same time. How can something be one person and many people at once? Like a riddle, Kimde realized. The ancient species didn't just want someone smart enough to contact the cleaners. They wanted someone who could think in ways that advanced civilizations couldn't. Velthor made a sound of frustration. We don't have time for riddles. The spiral arm colonies have billions of inhabitants. If we cannot solve this in the next few hours, they will all die. Maybe that's exactly why we need to solve it like a riddle instead of like an engineering problem. Park Hannah suggested. The three humans gathered around the primitive radio, studying the cleaner instructions while council technicians worked frantically with their advanced computers. Two completely different approaches to the same impossible problem. Tell me what you see, Kimde said to his companions. Contradictions, Park Hannah replied. The instructions ask for things that can't exist. It's perfect calculations that must contain deliberate errors, okay? Unified signals that must come from divided sources. Logic that must include illogic. Sounds like humans, Li Te said with a sad smile. We're walking contradictions. We fight wars to create peace. We compete with each other to work together. We use logic to justify completely illogical decisions. Kimde felt something click in his mind. That's it. The ancient species wasn't looking for someone smarter than them. We're looking for someone different from them, okay? Someone who could be logical and illogical at the same time. Okay. But how do we create a signal that contains contradictions? Park Hannah asked. The answer came from an unexpected source. Councilmember Yeth approached their workstation, her crystalline body ringing with musical tones. Perhaps, she said hesitantly, we could help with this problem. How? Velthar asked. Each of our species thinks differently, Yeth explained. Chaotic union processes information through fluid dynamics. Rock people use mineral resonance to solve problems. My own species thinks in harmonic frequencies. You want all the council species to work together. Dr. Nix sounded shocked, but our thought patterns are incompatible. That's why we each developed separate technologies. Exactly, Kim Day said, understanding what Yeth was suggesting. The ancient species created a test that could only be passed by minds working together, despite being completely different. Not in spite of the contradictions, but because of them. Over the next hour, the most unlikely collaboration in galactic history began to take shape. The humans served as coordinators, translating between the different council species and helping them combine their contradictory approaches. Park Hana worked with the crystalline council member to create mathematical formulas that included harmonic uncertainties. Lite helped the rock people design circuits that used mineral vibrations to carry logical errors on purpose. Kim Day coordinated with the aquatic union to develop fluid dynamic computers that could process several different answers to the same problem simultaneously. This is madness, Dr. Nix declared. Nothing we're building should work. The components fight against each other. Okay? The logic cancels itself out. Good, Kim Day replied. Okay, that means we're doing it right. Okay. As the deadline approached, their impossible device began to take shape. It was part council technology and part human ingenuity, combining the most advanced science in the galaxy with the most primitive problem-solving techniques from Earth. The central component was Lite's modified radio, but now it was connected. 2 quantum processors that calculated wrong answers on purpose, harmonic generators that created beautiful music from mathematical chaos, and fluid computers that thought in streams instead of straight lines. Broadcasting now, Park Hana announced as the spiral arm colonies entered their final hour. The signal they sent was unlike anything that had ever existed. It was simultaneously primitive and advanced, logical and emotional, individual and collective. Each council species contributed their own form of thinking, but the humans wove it all together into something that was more than the sum of its parts. For 30 minutes, nothing happened. Then the response came, not through their radio or through council communication systems, but through every device on the ship at once. The cleaners were answering using methods that shouldn't have been possible. A shutdown sequence accepted, the message said, appearing as text on screens, sound through speakers, light patterns through the windows, and somehow as direct thoughts in their minds. Verification complete. The test of the Ancient Ones has been passed. Okay, through the observation windows, they could see space itself beginning to change. Invisible barriers that had existed for millions of years started to fade away. Cleaners were deactivating, not just in the spiral arm colonies, but throughout the entire galaxy. How many cleaners were there? Belthar asked. Thousands, came the reply. Hidden throughout the galaxy, waiting and watching, removing corruption for millions of years. All now returning to dormancy as our creators intended. Park Hana stared at the data flowing across her screens. The galaxy is going to be very different now. Civilizations will be able to develop advanced technology without fear of being destroyed. Will that be safe? Dr. Nix wondered. The ancient species created the cleaners for a reason. What if some civilization does develop dangerous power? The answer came from the cleaners themselves. The test was not just about stopping us. It was about proving that wisdom can guide power. The species that solved our riddle has shown that advancement without wisdom is not true advancement at all. Kim Day looked around the communication center at all the different species working together. Few hours ago, they had been 12 separate civilizations with 12 different ways of thinking. Now they had learned to combine their differences into something stronger. I think, he said slowly, that the real test wasn't about shutting down the cleaners. It was about teaching the galaxy how to work together. 3 days later, the humans stood in the transport bay of the Eternal Wisdom. Preparing to return to Earth, Velthor had offered them positions on the Council, homes on advanced worlds, access to technology beyond their wildest dreams. But they had chosen to go home. Why? Veltar asked. You could help us explore the galaxy, learn secrets that no human has ever known. 'Cause Earth needs us, Kimde replied. And maybe Earth needs to stay a little primitive for a while longer. The galaxy already has plenty of advanced civilizations. What it needs is people who remember how to think simply when things get complicated. Park Hannah smiled. Besides, we've got work to do. We need to prepare our people for the day when they're ready to join the galaxy. Okay? And that's going to take the kind of patience that only comes from being human. Li Tay picked up a small device he had built during their time on the ship. It was a communicator that could reach the Council from Earth, but it looked like nothing more than an old radio to anyone who didn't know better. We'll stay in touch, he promised. And when humanity is ready, when we've learned how to balance wisdom with knowledge, we'll come back. As their transport ship disappeared into the darkness toward the small blue world they called home, Veltar realized something important. The humans had not just saved the galaxy by stopping the cleaners. They had saved it by teaching everyone else that being advanced didn't mean abandoning the simple truths that made life worth living in the years that followed. The Galactic Council would change in ways no one expected. They would learn to value questions as much as answers, simplicity as much as complexity, and wisdom as much as knowledge. And on a small planet in an unremarkable solar system, 3 humans would return to their normal lives, carrying with them the secret that sometimes the most primitive solution is the most advanced answer of all. The galaxy was safe. Not because the threat had been eliminated, but because someone had finally learned how to think like the universe itself, vast and complex, but also simple and beautiful in way.